What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Life Creative Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Whittam. In this episode, we're going to be talking about automation and different ways that you can automate away some of those annoying things. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go ahead and start defining what the problem is first of all. So if you have ever created any content and you've put it online, this is probably going to be a familiar problem for you. And I'm going to give you an example here of something that happens to me every time I publish a podcast. So let's take this one, for example, right? I'm going to record this podcast and I'm going to edit it and then I'm going to upload it. Now, that's not where it ends. If I do that, probably nobody's ever going to hear it unless you're one of my wonderful subscribers. And I appreciate you and love you for doing it. And if you're not subscribed to this podcast, hey, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But after I published it, there's a series of tasks I now need to do, right? I need to broadcast. I need to tweet out that this episode has been published with a link. I probably need to put it on LinkedIn. I'm going to put it on a blog post on one or two of my sites. And there's various other places like Instagram. I'm going to share it. You may have things like Facebook pages. All of these things that you do every time to tell the world that, hey, an episode has been made. Now, it doesn't matter what your content is. You're probably going to have some version of what I've just described. And the problem is that all takes a lot of time. And if you're in one of those streaks where you're busy creating and you've got the flow going, you really want to be making more content and not having to kind of put the brakes on the bus, as it were, and go and do all of this marketing, advertising online, whatever you want to call that, right? Social networking, whatever. Now, the good news is that if you used to spend a little time, you can automate a lot of those tasks. There's a lot of services online now, and there's two that I'm going to mention in this podcast that I use that enable you to take care of a lot of these things. A lot of these services, you may not realize, have what are called APIs, application programming interfaces. You'll hear some people say API means a different thing. But at the end of the day, what it is, they are parts of software that you can use one application to talk to another application. Now, for the non-technical, what that means is I can have something that says, hey, when I see a new episode of the Life Creative Podcast appear on the feed, I can respond to that by tweeting out that new episode automatically. And whichever other platform you're talking about here, Facebook, whatever it may be, can do the same thing. Now, there are services online that allow you to centralize a lot of this. There are some free ones and there are some paid ones. I'm going to go into two different versions here. And I've been using both of these for a while, trying to evaluate which is the best way to go. And there are going to be some complications with this as well. But stick with me on this. If you're already kind of glazing over and thinking, what is this technical crap he's talking about? Stick with me. Trust me, this is going to save you a lot of time and give you some more reasons as to why you would want to do this. Right? The first reason you want to do this is you get your time back, because the software online is going to take care of it for you. The second reason is consistency. It's going to happen every time you create something. This is going to get triggered and you're just going to let it run and it's fine. So that consistency also pays off, because if your users know you publish new content every Sunday afternoon, let's say, then by Monday morning or whenever, these automated services are going to push this stuff out for you, and that's also going to be consistently pushed out at the same time. Consistency is a big thing. Users love it. Let me say that again. Consistency is a big thing. Users love it. So what we're going to do is just going to stop here. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to give you a couple of example workflows that I have and how they work for me and how I have them set up and the services that I use, so that you have everything you need to know to go away and play with this. So we will be right back. Have you ever thought about creating your own podcast? Certainly you must like podcasts because you're listening to this one, and I'm sure many others. Well, if you've ever thought to yourself, I bet I could do that better, or I have a subject that I'd like to make a podcast for, then you can go ahead and do that very easily using Anchor.fm. In fact, Anchor.fm is the site that I use to host this very podcast. And what I like about it is they provide me all the tools and walk me through all the steps to not only creating my podcast, but very easily taking care of all the necessary details for distributing it as well. So if you want to go ahead and easily create your own podcast, start today on Anchor.fm. That's Anchor.fm. Alright, so let's break this down. So what is an automation? To break it down into a simple form, an automation follows this pattern. There is a trigger, and when that trigger occurs, the data from that trigger is taken and you do something with it, and that's essentially it. So it's as simple as that. Now, it's important that you understand anything you can think of can probably be automated at this point. To give you a very quick couple of examples to get you kind of thinking about it, it can be as simple as you get an email, you want that email to be stored in a spreadsheet, or you get an email and you want to save the attachment somewhere, or maybe someone fills in a form online and you want to capture those details in a spreadsheet and you want to have it emailed to you. Or maybe someone fills in a form online and for some reason you want to tweet that out. Any of those are good examples for automation, right? And if you're a creator and maybe you're doing some side hustles or something like that, you know, especially the ones that deal with managing data, are going to be super important to you. Because again, if it's consistent and automated, you can trust that it's working for you. You don't have to go and find a customer's details because they filled in a form or they sent you an email and then put those in a spreadsheet or do something with them. You can automate that entire process. And that means that you get your time back and you know that it's working and you can be focusing on the things that you need to focus on. Just like in a previous episode where I have asked the question, are you doing the things you need to be doing? This works right in line with that. And for that episode, I will put a link in the show notes because it's important that you understand that as well. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of examples now. So when I send out, when I publish a podcast, as I mentioned earlier, what I want to happen every time is it posts the episode to LinkedIn, it posts it to Twitter, it posts it to Instagram. It prepares the content in a task in my to-do app of choice, which is OmniFocus. However, I also use Things, and I have some automations that work with Things. But the point is that it automatically creates a task to remind me, go check and make sure these things are okay. If there's a service, for example, like say Pinterest, where it doesn't work with my automation software, the services that I use, I have to do that manually. So it creates a task in my to-do software that says, go post this episode. And in there, I put a link that I've automatically extracted from the data to, my to-do software. And then I can just see that task, pop over to Pinterest and put a pin up there for it. Okay. So that's one flow. Now I'm going to give you another example. When I take a photograph and I upload that photograph to my photography site, Graphics Media, graphicsmedia.com, when that hits the blog there and that image, I have an automation that will automatically post that out to Instagram with that photograph and a link back to my blog post. Now, if you think about that one in particular here for a second, if you are someone who's selling something online or trying to generate interest or, expand your followers or something like that, think about that for a second. You post a blog post on your website. You can take the data from that website, from that blog post, and manipulate it any way you need to in the automation and send it over to Instagram, send it over to Facebook, send it over to Facebook page, send it to TikTok, whatever it is. Okay. And all of that is going to help you expand your readership, your followers, whatever your goal is. So that's just a couple of examples of how I use automation. I have some others that deal with data. I have one, for example, if you go to one of my websites and you fill in a form there, I have on one website that form data is taken and sent over to an Airtable database, which is like a giant spreadsheet online for those of you that don't know what Airtable is. All right, so that data that they fill in the form gets put into the spreadsheet, and it's also emailed to me so that I know there's new data on the spreadsheet. Now, a lot of these automations as well can have, like this kind of chain of events, right? You may only have one trigger, but you can have multiple paths with that data, and you can have multiple steps. So, if you go back to the one that I'm talking about where I post my episode from the podcast, there's actually 11 things that happen automatically, one after the other, when it detects that trigger that I've posted a new episode to the feed. Okay, now this may be sounding a little complicated right now, so you may want to play this episode back a few times, but believe me, once you start thinking about automating some of the things you do over and over again, you will be amazed at the amount of time that you spend repeating tasks that you can have a machine do for you, right? It's not taking the personal, touch out of it. That's still in there, and it's still your content, and you can change that content to match particular sites or anything like that. So it's not just automated churning it out, sounding like a robot. It's just doing the clicks for you. If you think it's just processing, it's like when you get snail mail post, you open the envelope, you take the stuff out, right? Think of that as an automation, right? That part's going to happen every time. So you might as well just automate it. And that's really what this is about, is recapturing your time so that you have time to be doing the things you care about and the things you should be working on. And in my case, that is, I have limited time, so I want to spend as much time as I can making the content, not having to manage the content and publicizing it on social networks and so on. So what are a couple of the services that I use? Well, there is a free one with a paid tier, which is called If This Then That, and it's IFTTT.com. I'll put in links for these in the show notes. And it's very simple. You go to the website, you sign up. It's free to sign up. Like I say, there's a free tier, but there is a professional version that I use. And the name says it all, really. You go through and you fill in the blanks. So if this is going to be your trigger, then that is going to be the thing that you do when it gets triggered. Okay? There's another one called Zapier, which is Zapier.com. Now, this one has a free level as well, but to really get the advantage of all the functionality, you need to have the paid version. Now, both of these sites, and the reason I use both is because each one supports the applications that I use. So, for example, neither of them fully support all the apps that I need it to. OmniFocus works great with Zapier, but it doesn't work with If This Then That. Whereas and Things, which is another to-do app that I use, works with If This Then That. Okay, so you're going to have to experiment. And the great thing about these free tiers is you can go in, you can find the applications that you use or services that you use, right? So see if it supports your email. They all support Gmail, for example. Does it support a spreadsheet that you use? Does it support an online database that you use? All those kind of things. Content management, WordPress. Go to these sites, sign up for free, and try them out and see if you can get them working for you. It's going to be trial and error. It is not easy at first until it sort of clicks in your head as to how you can make this work for you. And what I would recommend for figuring out what's the best way for me to automate something is to write down what it is you want to automate. So, for example, when I was figuring out how do I automate all of this activity that takes place when I post a podcast episode, I literally sat down with a piece of paper and a pen and drew it out, right? And at the top of the page, I'm looking at the page right here in front of me. If you listen, here's the paper, right? So, at the top of the page, I've put, okay, podcast episode published. And then under that, I've got a flow of, okay, it's got to go here, it's got to go to LinkedIn, it's got to go to Twitter, it's got to go to Patreon, it's got to go to Buy Me a Coffee. And by the way, if you find this content useful, go to buymeacoffee.com/PWCOM. If you want to buy me a coffee to say thanks for this, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's got Instagram, it's got Vero, Slack, TikTok, Facebook page, and 4 websites, and then it's got YouTube as well. So I listed out on paper, kind of brain dumped all the steps that I would do that I need to have happen. And then I went to each of these services and figured out which is the one that's going to do what I need it to do. So I get that there's a lot in this episode, and I'm trying to keep it short, but I really wanted to spark that interest in you for automation. I'm sure you probably have questions or thoughts. I would love to try and help you out with this if I can. You can reach to me at peterwitham.com, right? PETERWITHAM.com. There's a contact sheet on there you can fill in. That's automated. One of these automations is going to come to me, so I know that you've done it and I can reply as quickly as I can. You can also reach out to me on Twitter at GrafixMedia, GRFXMEDIA. I would love to try and help you figure this out, because the more time that you spend, doing the thing that you need to do and letting machines take care of the monotonous tasks for you, the better it's going to be for you in the long run. I really cannot stress how much this has changed my life when it comes to creating content. Take care, everybody. I will speak to you again soon.